The Grumeti Fund is a groundbreaking project. During my visit to Tanzania, I had the opportunity to visit the concession and talk to 3 team members about their work. A type of work that's delivering meaningful impact, aligning community development and wildlife conservation. By investing in training and motivating their staff, developing public-private partnerships, sharing knowledge, and building networks, the fund has successfully contributed to a significant increase in the numbers of wildlife population in the concession and empowering the surrounding communities to further their development. These are their testimonials about the innovative and successful project that is the Grumeti Fund.
So over the last 15 or so years since our work started here in the Grumeti Reserves concessions, we have seen a lot of improvements, not only in terms of the habitat itself, but also the wildlife populations, especially the large herbivores. For instance, around 2004, from our aerial census that was conducted then, there were only about 350 elephants. In our most recent count, there were over 1,500 elephants. With no good habitat, we can't have all these wildlife species like animals to boast of. So our work to maintain the habitat is critical to what we do. First of all, we survey the areas regularly to identify all the invasive species and areas that are invaded, but also we assess herbaceous biomass so that first of all we know at all times the amount of fodder that is available for our herbivores here, but also that we have a better idea of the amount of fuel that is accumulating, which again impacts the fire dynamics here. It helps us determine whether to burn certain areas and which areas to exclude fires from, and also it's important to just make sure the diversity of species, that is grass species in the areas, is maintained.
My name is Matt Perry. In my role as conservation manager, essentially the department is responsible for the ecological management that takes place here on the property, and we're responsible for executing the conservation objectives when it comes to that ecological management. What does that entail? Fire management being an important component of this ecosystem. So we prescribe management burns in areas that need them, as well as suppress any arson fires, particularly pre-migration. Obviously, we want to try and protect as much of the grazing resource for resident wildlife, but also for migratory species. We also look out for wildlife health and well-being. We have, in partnership with our Tanzanian government partners through Tawiri, Tanapa and Tawa, when we have a snared animal, for example, we will intervene and try and provide treatments to that animal. Perhaps one of the biggest projects that we look after as well and that we implement here is wildlife reintroductions, especially for endangered species. And this really builds into our vision of restoring biodiversity and restoring ecological integrity here at the Grumeti Reserves.
The Grumeti Fund's a really interesting organization, I think. If you have good financial backing, so a philanthropist with deep pockets who's willing to put in the upfront seed capital to set something up, catalyze really meaningful public-private partnerships, but at the same time looking at how do we move away from this day-to-day or year-to-year donor dependency type of approach. We have to have a model where you know that all the blood, sweat and tears that have gone into a project like this won't all just go in a puff of smoke if our key one or two investors or philanthropists had to disappear. So I think in Tanzania has never been, well known for public-private partnerships. So the Grumeti Fund's had an opportunity here to almost be a groundbreaker, a trendsetter in this way. And I think at the same time, the open door policy we have, sharing this information, we really encourage people from other projects to come here. We've learned a huge amount from other projects. I like to think of the Grumeti Fund as one of the most open, organizations in terms of sharing knowledge and information. So at the end of the day, we all have the same desire, and that's, to be positively contributing to conservation and community work in Africa, and I think largely the success of the Grumeti Fund can be attributed to that, combined with really, really good people, investing in your own people. At the end of the day, these projects on make or break often comes down to the people and their level of not just expertise, but passion and enthusiasm to bring them over the line.
Stephen, Grumeti Fund's former executive director, talked to me about RISE, R-I-S-E, their research and innovation center focused on the Serengeti ecosystem. The center's purpose is to serve as a hub where scientists from all over the world can come to work the data collected by the fund's monitoring and research teams.
So the RISE Research Center, RISE stands for Research and Innovation in the Serengeti Ecosystem, really came about. We're doing some good research work here, and we're doing some good monitoring work, and we're collecting really meaningful data, but it's very focused on the 350,000 acres that make up the Grumeti concession area, and we're part of a much larger ecosystem, being the Serengeti Mara ecosystem. And we wanted to come up with something that would have that impact that we're having in our area at scale across the ecosystem, because we can do a great job upskilling people for this project and protecting this concession area, but what happens to these animals when they wander across the boundary into the national park or across the Mara River and go up into Kenya or into Ngorongoro? And concurrent to that, a feeling that we need to give something back as well. We need to be doing our part to train and develop top tier ecologists and conservation people to work in all of Tanzania's protected areas. So RISE is very much about that. It's about how do we bring the very best upcoming researchers from a postgrad level, so at a master's, doctorate, postdoctorate level, and bring in the very best from international university, mix them together and get them doing applied research on areas that are of real importance, not just to us, but to the longevity of the Serengeti ecosystem and the people who depend on it. So in that sense, what we want is a cross-pollination of ideas. Well, the building of networks and relationships is critical in the world we live in today. So I think there's a lot of scope for development there, and hopefully RISE can play a catalytic role in that. It's obviously world-renowned Serengeti ecosystem, but it really is faced with all of the major challenges facing protected areas in sub-Saharan Africa today. Strong human and cattle population growth right on your boundary, imminent poaching threats, climate change. These are cross-cutting issues which can, if we can do really good research here that helps to answer some of those questions, it's not just going to help us, it's not just going to help the Serengeti ecosystem, but it's going to help conservation in Africa in general, and protected area managers and communities by extension.
The fund's team acknowledges how the considerable increases in wildlife that are the pride of team members like Noah Mubizi can be seen as incredible negative for subsistence farmers living in the concession's boundaries. They know that these vast conservation areas can only last if the people living there believe in them.
As we have an environmental education center which brings school kids from around the communities to spend over a week here to learn about the environment, to see our work, to see the wildlife that we conserve here, and to be able to understand the interlinkages between wildlife conservation, the environment, and the community in general, both at the local level but also nationally, and I would say even globally, in terms of the importance of conserving these iconic landscapes and the species that exist therein.
So by co-locating the RISE Research Centre within a few hundred meters of our own environmental education centre, which focuses on the youth, we hopeful that this is going to really instill this desire and this this want within our neighbouring communities for school kids to further their education in the natural sciences and go into research and think of becoming an ecologist or a park manager or a researcher as something really exciting and a great career for someone who lives in this area. And we see that as important also for these postgrad researchers to give something back. If you're fortunate enough to go to Princeton or Stanford and you coming out here to do your field work in such a beautiful environment, you're having this incredible opportunity, the hospitality of the Tanzanian people to be here, can you give something directly back to local school kids and to local researchers? And I think seeing those people go on then to become park managers, become ecologists, become the people making the important decisions in Tanzania regarding Tanzania's wealth of protected areas and natural assets. If we can have a positive influence on that, raise the bar there, raise the quality of the people going into those positions and play our small part in that with our government partners, to me that would mean we've made a real success of this project. We've had some fantastic success stories now where we've seen people who started off here in the Environmental Education Centre, got a scholarship off the back of this, went off and studied, did an internship here and are now employed. They're the first people in their families ever to have, many of them to have gone to secondary school, certainly to university or vocational college. So that makes a huge, huge difference, and that creates role models in the communities as well. And also, one person in the community here with a good job earning good money can put a lot of family members and relatives through school as well. So you start to have a really amazing trickle-down effect where you're starting to get that scale. It's not
Because their objective is also to impact these communities positively, they know they must show these people tangible benefits for their lives coming from these conservation projects. It's not just about protecting these areas because they're critical natural habitats. It's also about turning these places into engines that help these communities flourish by providing jobs and opportunities.
The story about wildlife conservation success in our area wouldn't be complete without also talking about the relationship between us and the neighboring communities. The communities here, of course, were here before our management arrived, so clearly they had a role in maintaining this area. But since our project started, we have worked in a close partnership with the community and community institutions.
What's been more rewarding is to see how people's lives have changed, and the staff that work for this organization, both for the Grumeti Fund and for Singida Grumeti Reserves, is the development and the upliftment of people within these organizations. That's probably the best part of being a part of this project, is seeing those lives change for the good.
The people living right on the boundary of these protected areas, they have to live with the consequences of the success of the protected areas. So the huge increases in wildlife and everything that come about because we have good law enforcement and anti-poaching and good ecological management practices can be very, very negative if you're a subsistence farmer living just across the boundary here. So we need to be showing tangible benefit and having real impact in our neighboring communities. A big focus in the last few years has also been on women's and girls empowerment events. You know, they come in there voluntarily on their weekend, and the turnout is just phenomenal. The desire for people to better themselves, to learn more, to know more is there, and we've got to, we can help to facilitate that and provide and bring in Tanzanian female celebrities or very accomplished Tanzanian businesswomen who can talk to the girls, can act as role models, can answer some of the difficult questions that culturally are thought of as being taboo. They can talk about FGM, they can talk about these things that aren't readily discussed. And really show girls in these communities that there isn't only one option. You can have career aspirations, you can follow your dreams, and there is great opportunity. You have to give people the skills to start their own little businesses. So there we partnered with RaiseCore, a business incubation specialist, to help train and upskill entrepreneurs in this area and create more businesses, which is fantastic. It's a great catalytic effect here with people starting little businesses, restaurants, honey production, all sorts of things that have real positive spin-offs, as well as creating revenue and generating some money for those people. And then I think the final part linked to education is just investing in the youth. That's the future here. We have a human population in this area that's doubling every 15 years. Now, if these big conservation areas, these big protected areas are to survive in the long term, the only way they will survive is if the people around here believe in them and see value in them. And we can win hearts and minds at this age group a lot more easily than we can, with people who are a generation or two older. And it's not just about protecting these areas because it's important natural heritage for Tanzania, but these can be the engines of development and growth in rural areas, providing jobs and livelihoods and opportunities. There's a lot of people. There's 89,000 people living in 21 villages on the boundary of this concession area. That is a lot of people. We have to be reaching as many of them as possible, but we also have to be having meaningful impact, making a meaningful difference to them.
One particular challenge that's front and center right now is human-wildlife conflict. More especially human-elephant conflict, elephants that are going into communities, destroying livelihoods, by raiding food crops, and providing a threat to the community members that live in those areas. And so we are working with our Tanzanian government partners, stakeholders, to try and find a suitable solution, one that's effective right now. But in the meantime, we also assess those solutions that are being implemented as we speak.
Because historically, elephants have always been a terror. They're the things that come at night and eat your crops and damage your villages and potentially kill some of your family or friends. And to come here for a week and be immersed in one of the top protected areas in Africa, and to sit on a game drive vehicle and see animals like elephants through a completely different lens to the way you've ever seen them before. It's like we have to shine a very different light on them and look at it through a different lens. Ivory and rhino horn poaching is a big problem in Africa, and it gets probably the lion's share of the press as well. Bushmeat gets less press. It's not maybe as high profile, but the impact, especially in areas like the Serengeti Mara, is exponentially higher than the ivory or rhino poaching, which is fairly small where we are. Commercial bushmeat is poaching gangs that go in, set up camps inside the protected area, sometimes for weeks or even months at a time, and just harvest animals hundreds at a time. They kill the animals, often using huge snare lines, hundreds of snares, wire nooses set in the bush, also using bows, arrows, spears, dogs, motorbikes, all sorts of ways to kill wildlife.
There are huge volumes coming out of the system, and large bushmeat poaching syndicates which are providing bushmeat for bushmeat markets locally, but also more further abroad as well. Some of this meat has been traced going all the way through Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, in France, and is feeding bushmeat markets all the way over in Europe. So it's not to be underestimated, and without adequate protection, we would certainly see resident wildlife species, their numbers would drastically decrease, essentially to what they were here at Grumeti prior to the inception of this project in 2003, where you had a wonderful landscape but totally devoid of any resident wildlife.
Who better than an ex-poacher to catch a poacher? I mean, you know the routes, you know the areas, you know how it operated. You obviously bring a lot of skills to bear in that sense. Now, the vast majority of our wildlife scouts are ex-poachers. Some did more poaching than others, but in this area traditionally most people survived off two things: subsistence agriculture and poaching. Many of them weren't poaching because they love poaching. Most of them are poaching because either they're desperate, elephants destroyed all their crops and they need food, or more often it's just an economic opportunity. So if we can give those people better opportunities, gainful employment, give them salaries and the opportunity to put their kids through school and to take care of their families and everything, I mean, that has to be the ultimate win-win. That people will then look at these wildlife assets in these protected areas as not a hindrance or a negative, but as the key to their long-term survival. They are dependent on these areas absolutely for their survival. I mean, this is where fresh water comes from. These are the catchments of your streams. This is what your cattle and your goats and your sheep drink. It's what you need to survive as well. All the resources that come out of here, fuel for firewood, charcoal, everything, it can still be harvested. It just has to be done in a sustainable way. And we have to give people the opportunity that they don't feel that poaching is the best or only alternative left to them. We need to be giving real livelihoods opportunities to people and showing them, a different way that is going to help them, their children, their communities, future generations, and get real meaningful buy-in to the value of an incredible natural asset like the Serengeti ecosystem.